next. Stay with us.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, mind the booster gap. It's shrinking. The government's cut the time between the second and third COVID shots to just 3 months. 3 unlikely bedfellows reveal plans for an income insurance scheme. It could see redundant workers getting 80% of their wages for 7 months or longer, paid for by a levy. Critics reckon it's a 2-tier welfare system or a job tax, take your pick. A state of emergency is declared in Bulla as heavy rain hits. Super Rugby wings its way to Queenstown to avoid COVID sidelining the games. The MIQ Mare continues, with teachers getting a lesson in frustration or patience, depending on how you see it. And the Koala, born thousands of miles from home. Catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. People are likely to need the Pfizer COVID booster to get their vaccine passport renewed. This afternoon, the government announced that from Friday, the wait for booster shots for those aged 18 and over will drop to 3 months from the current 4. The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, says vaccine passports purposely came with an expiry date so that a decision could be made on whether to roll them over with or without the booster.
We've not made a formal decision about introducing a booster dose requirement in order to keep your vaccine certificate or get a new one, but I have previously signalled that I think it is likely that later on in the year, in order to keep your vaccine certificate, people will need a booster.
As of Friday, 3 million adults will be eligible for the booster. The Director General of Health says evidence shows that the Pfizer booster gives a similar level of protection against Omicron as 2 doses gave against Delta. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says the evidence shows that the protection from the second vaccine dose wanes over time, particularly against Omicron.
The good news is that there is clear evidence that with that booster dose of the Pfizer vaccine, that people's protection goes back up to a similar level to what it was for Delta with the 2 doses, and that is well over 90% protection against serious illness or hospitalisation.
A state of emergency has been declared in the Bulla district, which is being drenched by heavy rain. The Defence Force is heading to the west coast, and a rest home in Westport has already been evacuated. People are being told to be ready to leave their homes at short notice, and thousands of sandbags are on offer to help protect flood-prone properties. Met Service says up to 700 millimetres of rain could fall in the Westland Ranges and flow down to the coast. The Bulla Mayor, Jamie Klein, says evacuations are likely in Westport in the next few days. The bad weather cut power to about 600 homes and businesses in the towns of Franz Josef and Fox Glacier on the coast this morning. People whose homes were flooded in Westport last year are worried it could happen again. Lorraine Williams and her husband have just moved back into their Westport house after it was damaged in last year's flood. She's worried about the house flooding for a second time.
Just to see all the water coming down the road was just unreal. You still have nightmares about it. And now this has happened, you sort of think, well, why hasn't our mayor had it all fixed?
Lorraine Williams says she's been trying to move furniture off the floor. 3 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Tonga, bringing the total number to 5. In Nuku'alofa this afternoon, Tonga Prime Minister Huakava Meliku said that a woman and her 2 children had tested positive for the virus. The new infections come less than 24 hours after 2 men were confirmed to have coronavirus. Tonga will enter lockdown at 6 o'clock tonight. And the National Party says the government's proposed social unemployment insurance scheme couldn't come at a worse time. The government is proposing that people who've lost their job receive 80% of their usual salary for up to 7 months. It would be funded by levies on wages and salaries, with both workers and employers paying an estimated 1.39% each. National leader Christopher Luxon says his party's concerned the insurance will make the cost of living crisis even worse.
At the moment, New Zealanders need to keep as much of their money in their pockets as they possibly can, rather than paying a dump of tax, and that's what this is.
He says the government should abandon the scheme. To sport, and New Zealand Rugby has confirmed it will move all 6 New Zealand-based Super Rugby Pacific sides to Queenstown for the next month and possibly more. The NZR says the decision to move to Queenstown is to reduce the risk of COVID-19 sidelining any of the teams and provide the best chance of the inaugural Super Rugby Pacific season kicking off as scheduled in just over 2 weeks' time. Sports editor Stephen Hewson has more.
The NZR's Chris Lendrum says it'd only take one COVID case to shut down an entire squad for 10 days and lead to games being postponed or cancelled. The Blues, Hurricanes, Moana Pacifica and the Chiefs will fly to Queenstown on charter flights, while the Crusaders and Highlanders will bus south over the coming weekend. The squads will operate in separate bubbles, and while players and team management will be able to undertake some outdoor activities, they'll have to remain in their bubbles at all times and be subject to regular rapid antigen tests. Lendrum stresses the move to Queenstown's a temporary measure, with plans for teams to return to their home bases in March.
And New Zealand snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott says it's surreal going into the Olympics as a favourite. A bronze medalist 4 years ago, the 20-year-old is now on the top of her game after winning 2 gold medals at the recent X Games.
I never expected to be in this position, and it's such a switch flip from last time round, but I guess I just have the tricks that I can do and I'll bring them to Beijing, and if it works out, it works out.
Zoe Sadowski-Synnott begins competition on Saturday. That's the news.
MIQ's uncertain future.
MIQ has played an important role. Don't need to put a whole bunch of returning Kiwis when COVID's really endemic in the community running through an MIQ system.
Heyday for homeschool.
No indication this was coming. I just had to sit back making contact with a few other schools saying, is this happening to anybody else? And yep.
A word game gone viral.
I'll have my coffee, I'll have my Wordle. It's the only time during the day where I can just focus on one thing.
Helping the medicine go down. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint, but right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. First, a reminder, there's a red warning for heavy rain in force for the South Island's west coast. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, often cloudy with a few light showers or drizzle patches. Waikato to Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, but a chance of a light shower from Waikato to Taranaki. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, partly cloudy, occasional rain tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, periods of rain about Nelson and inland Marlborough and brief falls elsewhere. Heavy falls are possible about the ranges. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago lakes and rivers. Rain with very heavy falls and thunderstorms. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also Southland, rain or showers at times with possible thunderstorms. Rain clearing for coastal Southland late tomorrow morning. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, possible fog tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 5. We'll have more news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A safety net for workers, a gold-plated two-tier welfare system, or just another tax on business. The jury is out on the government's newly unveiled income insurance scheme that's been developed in conjunction with Unlikely Bedfellows, Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions. The insurance would mean people who've lost their jobs because of redundancy or illness get 80% of their usual salary for 7 months, with the option of stretching it to a year. It's paid for by a levy on both the worker and the employer. The full details of the plan have been released today for public feedback, which is already coming thick and fast. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
Bouncing back from redundancy, the insurance scheme would cover people who lose their job through no fault of their own.
This is a missing bit of our social security system, and it will pay benefits over the long term.
Under the scheme, employers would have to give 4 weeks' notice and pay if they lay off workers or make them redundant. The employee would then receive a further 6 months of financial support through the scheme if they haven't found a new job. They'd get 80% of their usual salary up to the current ACC cap, which is just over $1,800 a week. There would be support too for those who want to retrain. Employment lawyer Barbara Bucket thinks it's a good idea, but has some reservations.
We get lots of sham redundancies, and we get medical incapacity appearing on the horizon for, wrong reasons, improper and unjust reasons as well. So it's a high trust model, and that's my only concern. But where there's a genuine redundancy and where genuinely the employment relationship has come to that end for justified reason, then I think it's a good scheme.
Similar to ACC, the scheme would be funded through levies on wages and salaries, with both workers and employers paying roughly 1.39% each. But with annual inflation nearing 6%, a 30-year high, National leader Chris Luxon says the scheme couldn't come at a worse time.
At the moment, New Zealanders need to keep as much of their money in their pockets as they possibly can, rather than paying a dump of tax, and that's what this is.
His opposition leaves him at odds with the main business lobby, Business New Zealand. Its chief executive, Kirk Hope, says the country can't afford not to introduce unemployment insurance.
The scheme is designed to get people back into the workplace, to ensure that New Zealanders are more productive and that skills are better aligned to the demands of the modern economy. And if a person's displaced because they don't have the skills that they need to work in a mid-skilled, for example, job, where they come from a mid-skilled job, that's a really serious concern ongoing for New Zealand.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the insurance will give people security.
We've seen both after the Canterbury earthquakes and through COVID-19 the economic scarring that can occur when people lose their jobs. And we've known for many years that tens of thousands of people have health conditions, disabilities that knock them out of the workforce for a period of time.
The Green Party is warning the government risks creating a two-tier welfare system if it introduces unemployment insurance. Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March says it should focus on making urgent changes to the welfare system instead.
We don't want anyone feeling scared of losing their job and facing the prospect of poverty. The best way to avoid that is reforming our welfare system so that everyone, not just some people, have livable incomes and a safety net if they do lose their job.
Consultation on the proposed scheme closes at the end of April. It's expected to be up and running by the end of 2023.
The business advocacy group that helped design the income insurance scheme is kicking National Party criticism of it to the curb. Business New Zealand boss Kirk Hope reckons the scheme is needed to insulate industry and workers against future shocks.
Up until this stage, there hasn't really been any proposal, and there's been a lot of, different versions of it thrown around in different costs. So I think it was important to get proposals on the table for the business community to consider. We know that there are significant skills mismatches in New Zealand, and there are significant productivity issues. This is one mechanism for helping address those issues.
So, right now, you're not sure whether business will be on board with this or not?
I think that's why we've put a discussion document out there. We want to get feedback on it, and it's important to do so, I think, and for people to consider the proposals in greater depth.
Is it a jobs tax, as has been suggested?
No, I don't agree with that characterisation. But
why not?
Well, I think it's probably important to consider what it actually does and what it's designed to do. I mean, as we've seen in other situations where people suffer income shocks or economic shocks that lead to income shocks, that can have pretty long-term effects on them, their families and their communities, and not only that, the local businesses who they buy their goods and services from. So it was important for us to be at least part of a discussion that looked at why it might be important to address that, and that's why we were involved.
Because the National Party has criticised this as a jobs tax, says it's a gold-plated unemployment benefit, and its reasoning is this, that business is really feeling the burn at the moment, and then you're going to be asking for a contribution of almost 1.4% towards this income insurance. Can business afford that?
I wonder if you might take a different perspective on it, in that when people are out of work and are earning much lower incomes as a result, their ability to buy goods and services is heavily impacted, and it impacts the businesses in their communities. So when that happens on a large scale, and these schemes are designed to assist with, just transitioned through big economic shocks that might be coming our way in terms of technology disruption, whether it's via climate change or other means, then you don't want that to occur. We've seen that in our economic history, and we know that it impacts communities across New Zealand, or has impacted communities across New Zealand.
How did you settle at 80% of your normal wage and the cap of 130,000 and plus paying it for, well, initially around 7 months? How did you settle on those?
All good questions. So the design features around how much and for how long are broadly consistent with what occurs in other countries. I mean, there are a range of schemes that are quite similar operating in other countries. In fact, in the OECD, New Zealand and Australia are the only countries that don't operate these schemes. So we really looked at, the team that was working on it really looked at those features and said, hey, what is reasonable, what is affordable, and what is doable?
Why pay it to everyone, right? There's no means testing, there's no asset testing, no consideration given to how much income is coming into a household. For example, someone could have a partner that earns $1 million and they'll still be entitled to this. Shouldn't it be more targeted?
Well, if you were out of the workplace because you broke your ankle, you'd be entitled to ACC irrespective of what your partner is. So the schemes that operate globally are very much like ACC for redundancy. So that's the way that it was designed to work.
Yet if you're a beneficiary, your partner's income is taken into consideration. So where's the fairness factor here?
Well, I mean, I think, as I said previously, I mean, one of the things is this isn't a benefit. This is actually an insurance scheme that operates differently. And one of the things I think, for example, in the equity argument, is that this has the potential to free up money to go into that benefit system. Now, again, that's increasing incomes to which will go to local businesses as people consume more goods and services.
So do you think that this scheme should come in companion with a bolstered welfare scheme?
Well, that would be for any government to determine about what they do with.
But you represent business. Do you think that would be the best case scenario? It's not an either or. We can have this for people who become redundant and we can do better for the unemployed.
Well, we can certainly do better for people who are out of work, and that's what this scheme would do.
It covers redundancy, being laid off, right, if there's an economic downturn or a business fails. But you don't get this if your hours are reduced. Now, reducing hours to an intolerable or unlivable level, that's effectively, termination for some people, isn't it? So why not allow access if your hours are cut considerably?
Well, I mean, I think if you take a step back here, rather than treating the discussion document like a complete proposal, it's a discussion document. And I think some of those issues will need to be fleshed out. There's no doubt that the proposals aren't complete. That's why they're going to the public, so that people can input and give their perspective on that and about coverage. If you widen coverage, for example, you may increase the cost. So there are those other considerations that need to be taken into account. And again, that's why I think it's a useful time to get public feedback on it.
So people can have their say up until April. When would you like to see something in place?
Well, look, I mean, it will entirely depend on the feedback that is provided. I guess that from the Tripartite Future Work Forum, the time frame is the end of 2023 if there's a workable scheme that evolves out of the consultation and the discussions. So around then. Are
you confident about getting it across the line?
Well, I mean, again, the challenge is really the legislative timetable if it gets sufficient support.
Kirk Hope there, and if you want to have your say on the proposal, submissions close on the 26th of April and all the details are on MB's website. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtakane. What do you make of the scheme as it stands? Is it a good idea? The levy is set at almost 1.4%, so the employee pays in that much and so does the employer. And what do you make of it compared to the welfare system? Does it need a bolster too. Pātui mai, text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 19 minutes past 5. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere ake nei, coming up, the MIQ Mayor continues. This time it's teachers without a room. The COVID-19 booster rollout is being ramped up, with people soon having to wait just 3 months after their second shot instead of 4 months. The new rule kicks in from Friday as the government strives to boost the country's immunity before an expected Omicron surge. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Buckle up for a booster blitz. Another million Kiwis are soon to rejoin the vaccine queue.
I have to wait a few less weeks to get my booster, and the sooner we've got boosters, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah, I think the faster we're boosted, the better.
The more coverage we have, the less impact this Omicron is going to have on us, really.
The move comes as the Omicron threat grows, with fears the virus will explode over the coming weeks. Another 142 cases were reported in the community today, and daily numbers are expected to double every 3 or so days. From Friday, the wait for a booster will drop from 4 months to 3. It means anyone who had their second dose before November the 3rd will be eligible, about 2/3 of the population.
We need to get the number of people boosted as high as possible and before the outbreak really takes off.
And I want to urge everyone to make a plan to get your booster as soon as it is due.
Please, go and get your booster as soon as possible.
The reason is simple. While 2 doses of the vaccine provides strong protection against Delta, it's less effective against Omicron. A booster revives that immunity, reducing the chance of hospitalisation, and in turn the chance the country's health services will be overrun.
So don't think getting a booster is just about keeping yourself safe. It's about ensuring our hospital and health system is not overwhelmed, so those you love and everyone in our community who needs our hospitals can get the care they need in the coming months.
Other jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom and parts of Australia, have also moved to a 3-month wait. Here, authorities were waiting on advice from a team of experts chaired by the Health Ministry's Chief Science Advisor, Dr Ian Town.
3 months between doses of a vaccine is pretty much spot on, so there doesn't appear to be any downside.
Roughly 1.3 million people have had a booster already, but another million or so are still outstanding, despite already being eligible. Plans are underway for a big booster campaign this month, much like Super Saturday, designed to get needles in arms.
I can assure you we have excellent capacity across our system, and we certainly have a good supply of vaccine.
For now, only those 18 and over are eligible for a booster, but authorities expect more advice on those as young as 12 next week, meaning they too may soon be able to rejoin the queue.
Dr Nikki Turner is the Director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre, and she joins me now. Kia ora, Nikki.
Kia ora.
Why are we going to 3 months for a booster?
Well, there is good data now to show that a booster at the short of interval does work and you do get a good immune response. Ideally, we'd like a longer gap, but what we do know is this will work now, and that's what we need to protect people through the next few months.
So is it because we're expecting Omicron to hit us earlier, so it's better to have an extra jab in an arm than wait for a higher immunity?
Yeah, that's correct. But also the immunity is effective for 3 months. It's just that you could hope for maybe more longevity of immunity with a longer gap. What we do know with Omicron is it comes into a country, it circulates for around 3, maybe 4 months. So now is the time as a population, particularly for high-risk people, we want the best protection now. So this really is a good strategy to take.
Only about 60% of people have had their booster. Have we got vaccine fatigue, do you reckon?
No, I don't think so. Remember, we've only started boosting since the beginning of January, and many people hadn't got to the 4 months at that point. So in our world, we're not seeing any fatigue at this stage. I think we've got fatigue over the whole COVID issue, but not particularly around boosters.
Should we have gone earlier with boosters then? We adjusted it to 4 months before Christmas. Why didn't we just go straight to 3?
Yeah, it's a real trade-off. You know, you want the best immune response you can, and while there wasn't Omicron circulating in New Zealand, we had a bit of time. But we know that if people get their boosters, you're beginning to get a good immune response within a week. So getting boosters into people now in the next few weeks will be very timely.
So what about this UK study, which was from the UK Health Security Agency, indicating that the booster wanes within 10 weeks and significantly so? What concerns does that bring with it?
Well, what we know is the booster will give us protection now, and we're expecting Omicron to go through New Zealand in a wave in probably about 3 months. So the peak of protection will be as Omicron goes through New Zealand. Now, after that time, we do have immunity on board. It doesn't completely wane. Immunity is not just about antibodies. You still have cellular immunity memory on board. So it's not like your immunity just vanishes at 10 weeks. It's just that the antibody levels drop off. Now, for some people after that, we'll continue to get boosting as we see COVID disease. For some people who are very frail, maybe elderly, significant medical problems, in the future, we may potentially need more boosters. But that is not for everybody.
So when will we know if and when some people need to have a fourth shot?
Yeah, well, we'll have to watch over the next few months. There's no precise date. I think what it's looking very likely is healthy, well people will not continue to need boosters. But if we think about what we know with influenza, this is going to end up fairly similar to that eventually probably high-risk people, very elderly, people with significant medical problems may over time continue to need boosters. Not this frequently, but maybe something more like flu.
Nikki, I just want to go back to the timing here, because is there the potential here for us to stuff this up? In the sense, I look at this UK study, it says the effectiveness of the third Pfizer dose, right? 70% effectiveness after a week, but the booster shot's effectiveness drops to 45% after 10 weeks. We're trying to stall Omicron, right, and keep it at bay. In doing so, could we then get into a situation where people's immunity has peaked and is waning at the point the main wave of this infection actually hits us? Because some are predicting April for that.
Yeah, it is still a trade-off, whatever way you do it. But when you look at pretty well every country around the world, even if we manage the best we can for Omicron in New Zealand, we're expecting it to be a wave within 3 months. So I think this is the best timing, what we've got. And remember that not everybody's immunity will vanish at 10 weeks, that not everybody's the same. Young, healthy people will have immunity that lasts longer. Once again, our community will continue to have to protect those whose immunity drops off earlier. So that's just bunching everybody's immunity together, and that's not how it works. So this, I think, is the best estimate we're doing right now, knowing Omicron is building up in our community.
While we've been talking, people want to know what's the deal with boosters for under 18? Why aren't they eligible? Should they be allowed to get an extra shot?
Yeah, because the data to date is showing that younger people, firstly, are much less risk of severe COVID disease. So we've got to focus on the people we need to protect. And under 18s, with 2 doses, will still be highly protected against severe disease. So there is no urgency at the stage with the science knowledge to rush in and vaccinate under 18s. There is a consideration for those who might have very severe medical conditions to think about them, but not for healthy young people. They have a huge advantage with their immune system, unlike people of my age that definitely need boosters.
Ngā mihi, Nikki. That is Dr. Nikki Turner, the Director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre. Government plans to plug critical worker holes created by COVID appear to be falling flat. Plans were announced last year to let 300 international teachers into the country, but fewer than 10 have arrived. Meanwhile, a scheme to create special MIQ spaces to help fill vacancies in the health workforce has also struggled to attract demand. That's got principal and nurses alike crying out for some changes at the border. Nick Trubridge has the story.
It was pitched as a plan to bolster teaching ranks dented by the pandemic. Border exceptions promised last July to get 300 overseas teachers into the country. But the number that have actually made it through MIQ and into the Kiwi classroom, a grand total of 8.
There are changes that are needed within the MIQ system to fast-track some of the paperwork. It's not just MIQ, it's the paperwork that teachers hit once they are in the country and in the schools. That is also part of the problem.
Principals Federation President Cherie Taylor-Patel says MIQ requirements and the pandemic are creating the perfect pairing to turn teachers off. Getting the visa is one thing, but it doesn't come with a place in MIQ, nor does it give any sort of priority.
Specialist teachers in secondary school and teachers in the rural sector have been the two key areas for a long time that are problematic. I see in this, in the latest data though, there have been a lot of applications from the early childhood sector to recruit teachers, and that will be because they will be worried about the impact that Omicron might be going to have now.
Ministry of Education data supplied to Checkpoint shows it's received 156 employer applications and approved 143 for border exceptions, allowing schools to begin recruiting overseas teachers. So far, 61 have had their visas approved by Immigration NZ, but just 8 are here, while 11 others have secured a place in MIQ.
It certainly is a system that is needing streamlining, but in this instance, I'm also concerned about the number of overseas teachers that actually haven't applied to come to New Zealand at this time.
The ministry says there simply weren't as many applications for the teacher border exception as expected, with Cabinet at the end of last year agreeing to broaden the criteria so schools and early learning centres can get much needed staff. But it's not the only scheme of its ilk that hasn't quite lived up to the hype. Back in October last year, Health Minister Andrew Little unveiled something similar for health and disability workers, except this time 300 MIQ spots a month were guaranteed. Since November 1, 435 in total have been issued with MIQ vouchers out of a possible 900 spaces.
We've always heavily relied on internationally qualified nurses coming through our borders and taking up positions here. So the figure that you've quoted is significantly concerning for us because we're not replacing the numbers of nurses that we're seeing leaving.
Nurses Union Kai Whakahaere, Keri Nuku, isn't happy because just 129 of those 435 health workers are nurses, a number she says is far from ideal given domestic shortages.
Almost 3,500 vacancies throughout the country, and all we can rely on coming through the MIQ spots is such a minuscule number that sends a message to nurses that they're not being heard and that nobody is going to be coming to their rescue anytime soon.
Now she's after answers. Why are so few international nurses travelling to Aotearoa to fill the gap they once did?
And if we can't get them through the MIQs, we've got to look at how many nurses inside New Zealand have been internationally trained, but because of the competency and return to practice are unable to practice inside New Zealand. There are significant numbers of that as well.
The Ministry of Health says it's starting a recruitment campaign this month for international nurses using Google AdWords, Google search ads and targeted ads through Facebook and Instagram. In the meantime, the holes in the health and education workforce remain. Checkpoint invited Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy on the programme to front on the issue. He declined.
And that report from Nick Trowbridge. Kia ora e te iwi e Hariaki nei e Checkpoint. Only 37% of eligible 5 to 11-year-olds have had a COVID vaccination. Have claims the Taliban offered safe haven to a pregnant Kiwi trivialised the terrorist group. And the koala born thousands of kilometres from home. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ane a iwi mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora tātou. The government says that people are likely to need the Pfizer COVID booster to get their vaccine passport renewed. It's announced that from Friday, the wait for Pfizer booster shots for those aged 18 and over will drop from 4 months to 3. Director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre, Dr Nikki Turner, told Checkpoint that this is a good strategy to take as Omicron will circulate for 2 or 3 months and we need the best protection now. A state of emergency has been declared in the Bulla district, which is being drenched by heavy rain. The Defence Force is heading to the west coast, and a rest home in Westport has already been evacuated. People are being told to be ready to leave their homes at short notice, and those whose homes were flooded in Westport last year are worried it could happen again. The bad weather cut power to about 600 homes and businesses in the towns of Franz Joseph and Fox Glacier. 3 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Tonga, bringing the total number to 5. In Nuku'alofa this afternoon, Tonga Prime Minister Huakava Meleku said that a woman and her 2 children had tested positive for the virus. The new infections come less than 24 hours after 2 men were confirmed to have coronavirus. Tonga will enter lockdown at 6 tonight. The National Party says the government's proposed social unemployment insurance scheme couldn't come at a worse time. But Business New Zealand says the scheme is needed to insulate industry and workers against future shocks. New Zealand Rugby says it'll move all 6 New Zealand-based Super Rugby Pacific sides to Queenstown for the next month and possibly longer. It wants to reduce the risk of COVID-19 sidelining any of the teams and provide the best chance of the inaugural Super Rugby Pacific season kicking off as scheduled in just over 2 weeks' time. And the local stock market has had its biggest day of the year. The NZX Top 50 closed up 231 points, or 1.9%, to 12,290. Our next news bulletin is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nicholas Poynton, who is here to talk business news. Hey Nicholas, unemployment falls to a record low. That's interesting on a day the government's announced an insurance scheme for employees.
Yeah, truly, no, it truly is. So those headline figures that came through today from Stats NZ, they show the jobless rate was at 3.2%. That's down slightly from a revised 3.3% rate we saw in that prior quarter. Now, annual wage growth, that was up 2.8%. That may sound encouraging, but let's not forget that this is far behind the annual inflation rate of 5.9%, so people's wages clearly are not keeping up with the rising cost of living. Now, in terms of the economic analysis on this, ASB's Mark Smith says the labour market remains very stretched at the moment and expects it to remain that way for some time. He says the worsening Omicron outbreak might significantly disrupt labour supply, and that's going to exacerbate those current pressures we're seeing in the labour market, with many firms struggling to get their hands on or get the people with the right skills they need into their business. And the Reserve Bank, if we remember, has that mandate of maximising sustainable employment as well as keeping inflation at around 2%. But Smith says the strength in wages would add to existing inflation pressure, which is already close to 6%, which would underpin the RBNZ's rates hikes throughout the year. So all eyes will be on that first RBNZ announcement later this month.
And Nicholas, brace for the next topic of conversation. The country's first non-fungible tokens auction is judged a success. Yeah,
non-fungible tokens, NFTs. Look, this was an auction for a pair of glass negatives of some well-known photographs of the celebrated local artist C.F. Goldie, taken between 1910 and 1920. But what made this auction truly unusual and piqued the interest of our business team was that the prospective buyer would also get NFTs off those images. And to put it as simply as possible, NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, they use blockchain technology to allow for the ownership of pretty much anything digital. That could be videos, memes, tweets and photographs. But for a video to become an NFT, they're essentially minted. They're established as a unique file. They're uploaded to what's called a digital ledger, that is the blockchain, and they can then be owned and subsequently traded. And this auction, believed to be the first of its kind at a major auction house, that was Webb's Auctions, says that each of these works, they had a guide price of between $5,000 and $8,000, but they ended up fetching a combined $127,000. Now, it's hard to split if that value, that real interest, came from the negatives or the NFTs, but speaking to Webb's Auction today, they were very excited about the potential for NFTs in the art world, in the auction space. It's clear where they saw the value coming from, but I should say this wider NFT craze does have its fair share of skeptics. Some analysts saying that the whole industry has been fueled by hype and low interest rates over the past couple of years. So if you are interested in this sort of thing, I would say please try and do your research, or at least consult a financial advisor to see if these types of products have a place within your investment portfolio.
Okay, for something more straightforward than NFTs, let's go to the market.
Well, as you heard in the bulletin before, sort of stole my thunder there. You look, the NZX Top 50, biggest day of the year, closing up 231 points to 12,290. The dollar trading at 66.3 US cents and 93 Australian.
Ngā mihi, Nicholas, ka kite. Nicholas Poynton there with business news. The New Zealand-based Super Rugby squads are moving to Queenstown this weekend in a bid to avoid COVID cancelling any matches. Our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, joins me now from our Wellington studio. Stephen, why have they decided to do this?
Of the Omicron spike, I suppose, is the real reason behind it. So they've said, in case that hits, we're going to head to Queenstown, and they're going to pack up all the teams. And so the Blues, the Chiefs, the Hurricanes and Moana Pacifica will fly to Queenstown on charter flights this weekend. And the Highlanders and the Crusaders will bus to Queenstown over the weekend as well.
Stephen, did they give any indication of why they think that Queenstown is going to be any safer than anywhere else in the country?
Well, it's all about the accommodation, really, because that's what they've got to work with. They've got hotels, they've got rooms, they've got fields that their teams can practice on. It's a management situation, so they can operate, or they will be operating in their own bubbles, each team, and it's simply a management proposition around getting things there, doing it much more straightforward. They saw Queenstown as the way to go. They'll also then bus to Invercargill for a couple of games, but all up, all the teams are going to be based in Queenstown.
And do we know how long they intend to be there?
Hopefully for a month. Well, that's the plan. And they're promising to get the teams back sort of early March. I mean, there's obviously some players were somewhat concerned about having to be away from family and friends for so long, and there may well be one or two players that decide that they don't want to head to Queenstown. But if they want to get the competition underway, this is what the NZR, with the Players Association, so there's been plenty of discussion, have decided is going to be that best step to actually make sure that this new competition can get underway.
Thanks, Stephen. Our sports editor, Stephen Hewson there, just on the New Zealand-based Super Rugby squads, all moving to Queenstown this weekend. A state of emergency has been declared in the Bulla district as heavy rain continues to pommel the region. Thousands of sandbags have been dispatched to help people protect their homes. The Defence Force is headed to the west coast, and one rest home in Westport has already been evacuated. But the worst could be yet to come, and people have been told to remain on alert for the need to leave at short notice. Rachel Graham has more.
Heavier rain than normal has soaked much of the west coast throughout today, and the downpours are set to continue for several days. The Met Service says up to 700 millimetres of rain could fall in the Westland Ranges, which is flowing on down to the rain-soaked coast. In the Bulla district, a state of emergency was declared this afternoon. The council says this is to allow the civil defence controllers to direct and coordinate personnel, material and other resources made available, and to give them access to extraordinary powers to respond to the emergency. The Bulla Mayor, Jamie Klein, says the biggest issues are expected to arise on Friday and Saturday after days of heavy rain, and there will almost certainly need to be evacuations.
We're yet to determine the extent of that, but certainly the messaging to the community is to be ready for those instructions. But it's not like imminent, it's not like today or tonight, it's more likely to be in the coming days.
The O'Connor rest home in Westport is being evacuated, with 68 residents moved out. Some will go to Christchurch, and a ward within Bulla Health has also been closed. 10 Defence Force personnel, along with 4 trucks and a support vehicle, are headed to Greymouth to help with any evacuations in coming days. The Defence Force says other capabilities are on standby to deploy as they are requested, and an RNZ-AF NH90 helicopter will also fly to the coast to assist. Met Service has given the rain event a red warning, meaning it is the most severe weather event, and meteorologist Lewis Ferris is warning today is just the beginning.
This is just the beginning of this red warning event, and people do really need to be prepared for that rain to get worse if they're not seeing that rain already, if they're in the western parts of the South Island, and to really take heed advice from the local authorities, whether it's civil defence offering advice.
Westport was badly hit by flooding in July last year, and many residents, like Stephen Switella, are yet to get back in their homes.
When they stripped it from the last time, there's already got the new jib and all that, and the new doors and all that there, and architraves and skirtings and that. We're just waiting for the plumber there to finish off the plumbing for the bathroom so they can finish the bathroom, and there's serotonin in the bathroom. And the kitchen's supposed to be arriving next week there. It would definitely be heartbreaking, all right, to go for it once it's so soon.
Westport's Lorraine Williams and her husband moved back into their house 2 weeks before Christmas, after it was damaged in last year's flood.
Just to see all the water coming down the road was just unreal. You still have nightmares about it. And now this has happened, you sort of think, well, why hasn't our mayor had it all fixed?
Further south, the Westland Mayor, Bruce Smith, is optimistic that his region won't be too badly affected, but says it never hurts to be prepared.
The warnings are out, and being prepared and taking care, and keeping off the roads. Make sure your car's full of gas. All of those common sense things never does any harm. Even if nothing comes out of this, it won't be a disadvantage.
Over the next few days, everyone on the West Coast is asked to keep aware of civil defence warnings, and if anyone is feeling unsafe, to evacuate to friends or family on higher ground.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hei muriaki ina pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the government's new income insurance scheme effectively create a two-tier welfare system. The Conservation Minister's promising a forensic examination of the funding available to Tūhoi to maintain Te Urewera and Lake Waikari Moana as one of the Great Walks after an iwi appeal for more money. Te Urewera was shut down back in August when Delta arrived and the country went into level 4. Tūhoi, the iwi and kaitiaki of the area, said Crown under-resourcing had made the Lake Waikari Moana track unsafe. Earlier this week, an iwi leader told Checkpoint the lake is reopening on Waitangi Day and the Great Walk will reopen in 2 weeks, but Tūhoi will be talking to the government about extra funding. Kei hea te putia, where's the money? Conservation Minister Kitty Allen says she's investigating.
Well, I've gone back to my guys and I've asked them to kind of give me a forensic analysis because that's the first I've ever heard of that figure being put on the table. The sum that's always been a part of our discussion with myself and Dhamati, with myself and, the board and myself and the senior leadership team, it's been around about that $2.5 million figure. I haven't heard it ever escalate up to $7 million. Now, if that is the case, I've gone to get my number crunchers to go give me a bit of a very robust forensic analysis of all the dimes that were spent there prior to settlement in 2014. But to date, the best of my knowledge is that it's around about 2.5 mil. That's kind of what's been agreed, and this comes as news to me. So I'll look into that claim.
So would you accept, though, you've sent people away for their forensics over the numbers. If you find there is disparity between what was paid for upkeep prior to Tūhoi taking over, is there any justification for why Tūhoi shouldn't get the same kind of money?
Oh, look, no. You know how these things go, Lisa. There's only so much money in the pot. And so if there is a justifiable claim, look, those things are always up for an annual discussion. And that's the whole purpose of the responsibility that's on the shoulders of both the CE of the Te Urewera Board and the DG of the Department of Conservation. It is an annual discussion. It is to reach agreement and it is to work out the resourcing allocation.
What happens if Tūhoi decides it doesn't want Waikari Moana to be a Great Walk? Is that its decision and it's done and dusted if that's what it chooses?
It's not. So that decision there, and this is as a consequence of the 2014 settlement agreement, because the management of both the walk and Te Urewera Park are now under the Te Urewera Board. That's not a decision for me to make. I don't have that discretion.
that decision-making ability rests with Te Urewera board.
So
now,
if the board decides it no longer wants a bar of it, Minister, because of its claim that it's under-resourced, if it decides, because of under-resourcing, that it doesn't want the Waikari Moana walk to be a great walk anymore, it's entirely up to the board to choose to do that, and they could stop the public using that walk.
No, they cannot stop public access. That's one of the key priorities within the Tūhoe settlement legislation. But the agreement that the national government made in 2014 was to devolve the decision-making of Te Urewera Park to the Te Urewera board. Now, if they make the determination not to come under the umbrella of the Great Walks brand, they are entitled to do that. I don't have discretion to exercise there.
How do they keep people safe? Because that's their question. Without the resources to keep the upkeep of the track and the huts and all the rest of it, how do they keep people safe if they don't get the funding that they want?
Well, look, our guys go in there and they provide a bit of a robust analysis. The overarching obligation or one of the overarching principles for the Department of Conservation, and this goes back to Cave Creek and the things that we learnt during that time, is that health and safety is the utmost priority for all of anything that we operate or run. So I know that our guys have been in there frequently undertaking assessments as to the health and safety requirements. There's been challenges getting to agreement as to what needs to be done, who will do it. I understand that agreement was reached in December, and so that was the agreement for that $1.5 million to pass through, and it was agreed between the parties that that would constitute enough resource to get the relevant structures up to the required levels for health and safety measures. Now, as a consequence, there's a lot of work going on in that park at the moment, and those structures will be reopened, as I best understand. I think it's in time for Valentine's Day.
There seems to be some space between you still, right? So how are you going to solve this?
I don't know if there's necessarily space. I mean, it's quite an interesting arrangement that they've got there, right? So we own the huts, the tracks and the bridges and the like. They, Te Urewera board, manage the park. And so every year, as a consequence of legislation, the parties must come together and work out an operational budget and a plan. And, the parties both have to agree to that. And that's where the obligations are. I don't personally think that there's a vast space there, but, it's something that every year, as a consequence of the legislation, this is a requirement that the parties have to do, and we go about doing that every single year.
And that's Conservation Minister Kitty Allen. New Zealand's reached 94% double dosed for those aged 12 and over, but the COVID vaccine hasn't been such a hot ticket for children aged 5 to 11 just yet. The age group has been able to get the vaccine for 2.5 weeks, but so far only 37% have. Despite that, schools are back and measures have been put in place to keep tamariki as safe as possible. Our reporter Hamish Cardwell and cameraman Samuel Rillstone spoke to Wellington parents on the school run.
The start of a new school year, and one that's unlikely to be like any other, with Omicron set to circulate widely in the community. Wellington mum Caroline, dropping her daughter off at Berempore School, says her children have had their first dose. But on the first day back, she's feeling apprehensive.
My youngest, who's 5.5, so she's been a little bit emotional over this last week coming back to school, and I do think it's probably around the uncertainty, not knowing kind of how things are going to be, and we've been talking a lot about Omicron is here. We're probably all going to get it at some point.
Amit, the father of a 9-year-old, says while he is pro-vaccine and has had his shots, he has been a bit hesitant and hasn't taken his daughter in for a vaccine yet.
That's something that she asked about the other day because one of her friends got the jabs. So she was like, okay, when are we going to do it? And I was like, look, we will talk about it whenever you want to, and go and get it done if you want to.
Sam Huggard, who has a 5 and a 10-year-old, thinks the timing of the outbreak helps ease the disruption to learning.
We're quite lucky in a way that it's February, March for this wave to be coming, because you can keep the rooms open and more ventilated. There's heaps more outdoor time. If we're having this conversation in June, July, August, it'll be having a bit more of an anxious reaction. But we're lucky in a sense that we've been able to get through summer and do the best we can to try and prepare for this.
37% of children have had their shot, and parents spoken to by RNZ say they've had no trouble getting an appointment. Meanwhile, the red COVID settings mean schools are minimising the number of adults allowed on site. They're asking parents to drop their children off at the gate if they can, rather than bring them into their classroom. And there are some other new rules.
The new rules mean children year 4 and older do have to wear masks inside, but the younger ones, it's encouraged but isn't mandatory. Schools are being asked, open your windows and doors, let the air ventilate, and in Wellington, that's not going to be too much of a problem. The schools are asking parents, if your child has COVID symptoms, keep them at home, get them tested before they come back into school.
Berhampore School Principal Mark Potter says he only got detailed information about the new settings 10 days ago, which is not a lot of time to prepare.
We're as prepared as we can be. One of the things you have to do to be prepared for it is we're talking about, a bit like D-Day, you've got to have 58 plans and only use 3 of them, because so many different scenarios can come up. For a school, it's going to be about maintaining our workforce. And of course, our role is to make sure that the parents can maintain their place in the workforce. So we're not going to see the closures of schools like we have in the past.
Mark Potter says the school will experiment with the best approach to masks.
We are getting parents who are questioning about the masks and worrying about what impact that may have. So it's about working through with them so that they feel more comfortable with what we'll be doing with masks, so that they don't feel that pressure to keep their children home. Because there's a lot of parents saying they might keep their kids home, but they don't want to homeschool.
The bell sounds and a new year begins. And for New Zealand, the real test is about to come.
And you can check out the video that goes with Hamish and Sam's story. It'll be on our web page. Countries across Europe are dealing with the pandemic in vastly different ways. In Denmark, all COVID restrictions have been lifted, including the wearing of face masks, despite an increase in cases. Nightclubs are open, late-night alcohol sales have resumed, and the COVID app is no longer needed to enter venues. CNN's Scott McLean is in Copenhagen.
Loud music, stiff drinks, and close talking. In Denmark, they're partying like it's 2019. After 2 years of on-again, off-again restrictions, mask mandates, and lockdowns, Denmark has officially kissed COVID restrictions goodbye.
I am over it. I think everybody is.
I'm excited. We've been waiting for this moment for so long.
In reality, the pandemic hasn't gone away. In fact, new average daily infections in Denmark are more than 12 times higher than the country's previous peak, and rising.
Is now really the best time to do away with the rules?
Sure. And of course, everybody's asking us that question. But when we're looking at our hospital admission rates day by day, and we see fewer and fewer cases, and we see very few cases in the elderly that are vaccinated, actually admitted to hospital or even dying.
And that's just because of vaccination?
I have no other good explanation why Denmark is in such a unique place.
Denmark has one of the highest vaccination rates on Earth. Late last year, they lifted most restrictions, only to once again batten down the hatches in December, closing schools, mandating masks indoors, and putting curfews on bars and restaurants. Now, virtually all of those restrictions are gone.
Is it really the end this time?
Well, we hope so, but we promised the citizens of Denmark that we will only have restrictions if they are truly necessary, and we'll lift them as soon as we can.
It's not just Denmark. Last week, England lifted nearly all of its domestic restrictions as lawmakers set out a novel new strategy.
We must learn to live with COVID in the same way that we've learned to live with flu.
Before the vaccine, COVID was a lot more deadly than the flu, but as immunity rose and a less severe variant emerged, deaths directly caused by influenza or pneumonia are now not far off of COVID, and lately they're contributing factors far more often.
Don't touch the water. Nelson is home to the clearest lake in the world, but it could have a gloomy future. An invasive algae called lake snow has been found nearby. Naomi Arnold went for a hike to find out more.
High in Nelson Lakes National Park, Rotomare Whenua, or Blue Lake, is at least 2 days' walk from civilization. Visibility of the lake water is between 70 and 80 metres, making it close to the clarity of distilled water. Rob Merrilees noticed the lake's unusual purity 20 years ago. In 2009, he returned with NIWA's Rob Davies collie to take some measurements.
And I had a 50-metre tape. First reading we got about just under 50 metres, and I said, just leave it there because the bay's got to settle, we've been in it. When we came down and had another look, we didn't have enough tape. So we went back to the hut and we scrounged around the hut and found every piece of string that we had and tied them all together. And we came back and tied it onto the tape and extended it. And so we got over 65 metres, and on the trip out they knew they had to come back and do something, and that's where it all started from.
NIWA returned and confirmed the lake's visibility was more than double that of Oregon's Crater Lake, the clearest known lake at the time. Today, Blue Lake is a popular tramping destination and a stop for many walkers on Te Araroa. But now a microscopic invasive algae, lake snow, may be threatening to pollute its crystal waters. The slimy brown stuff sticks to fishing gear, boats, motors and people. Tasman District Council spokesman Tim O'Connell says lake snow is already in neighbouring lakes, Rotoiti and Rotorua. It spreads when people don't wash and dry contaminated fishing and hiking gear. To help protect the lake, DOC has hired its first paid hut warden, Kylie Batt. Her iwi, Ngāti Apa ki te Rato, has a particular cultural interest in the Nelson Lakes.
It's extremely sacred to our local iwi of Ngāti Apa ki te Rato. So although it says no swimming, that's not the case. It's no touching. We really don't want to have that cross-contamination happen in any way, shape or form.
She says most people are respectful.
But you're always going to get some people that aren't, especially if they're not culturally sensitive, because sometimes they believe that's why they can't get in the water. But it's not just that, although that's really important. It's really a biosecurity hazard now.
Kylie's presence is good news to Rob Merrilees, who remembers when trampers camped next to the lake, swimming and washing dishes in the clearest water in the world. He's glad it now has protection.
Maybe New Zealanders can appreciate it more. That's all that matters to me. It is a beautiful place, and it should be appreciated for what it is. It shouldn't be trashed.
Let's get to some of your feedback before the news. Overwhelmingly, it seems to be in support of the income insurance plan. This person says income insurance is vital. Also, more money needs to be injected into welfare, housing, health and education. It will not bankrupt the government, says Maureen. On the other hand, someone says, seems like the government is shifting the cost of paying for unemployment from the public sector to the private sector, same as the government did with raising the minimum wage. The system is a pig with lipstick on, open to abuse, and same as ACC, which is also an insurance scheme.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The Pfizer booster rollout is being sped up, with people soon having to wait just 3 months after their second shot instead of 4. The new rule kicks in from Friday as the government tries to contain the spread of Omicron. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The change means anyone who had their second dose before November the 3rd will be eligible from Friday, about 2/3 of the population. It's hoped the move will help bolster the country's immunity before the Omicron outbreak explodes. Authorities are planning a campaign to encourage people to get that third dose. For now, only those 18 and over are eligible, but officials will consider new advice on those as young as 12 next week.
The head of the Immunisation Advisory Centre doubts COVID-19 booster shots will be needed on a regular basis. Dr Nikki Turner has told Checkpoint she doesn't believe people who are healthy will continue to need ongoing shots.
If we think about what we know with influenza, this is going to end up fairly similar to that eventually probably high-risk people, very elderly, people with significant medical problems may over time continue to need boosters. Not this frequently, but maybe something more like flu.
The High Court has knocked back a bid by a small group of parents to stop the COVID vaccine rollout for children. A group of 8 parents had sought a judicial review of the immunisation program, saying there was evidence the health risks from the vaccine outweighed the benefits. They were also worried that schools would require children to have the injections and the youngsters would be under significant social pressure to be vaccinated. The court has dismissed the application, saying the merits of the case were weak. A state of emergency has been declared in the Bulla district, which is being drenched by heavy rain. The Defence Force is heading to the west coast and a rest home in Westport has already been evacuated as a precaution. People are being told to be ready to leave their homes at short notice and thousands of sandbags are on offer to help protect flood-prone properties. Met Service says up to 700 millimetres of rain could fall in the Westland Ranges and flow down to the coast. The Bulla District Mayor, Jamie Klein, says more evacuations are likely in the next few days.
Certainly the messaging to the community is to be ready for those instructions, but it's not like imminent, it's not like today or tonight, it's more likely to be in the coming days.
The bad weather cut power to about 600 homes and businesses in the towns of Franz Josef and Fox Glacier this morning. The Tongan government has stepped up contact tracing measures in order to ring-fence community transmission of COVID-19. 3 new COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Tonga this afternoon, bringing the total number to 5. The parliamentary speaker, Lord Whakawhanua, said one of the original 2 cases may have been positive in the community for some time last week. He says it's not clear how they contracted the virus.
What we do know is the Adelaide vessel had positive cases on board, and all the humanitarian aid that reaches the border in Tonga is received in a contactless fashion. We can't speculate on the particulars right now, but the government is working on contact tracing and ensuring that we nip this in the bud as soon as possible.
Tonga was due to enter lockdown at 6. Leaked text messages about the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison's character have overshadowed his attempts to reset the narrative ahead of the federal election. The ABC's Stephanie Boris has more.
Scott Morrison was keen to promote the government's efforts to reduce unemployment and strengthen the economy during yesterday's National Press Club. However, he's faced repeated questioning about leaked text messages between former Premier Gladys Berejiklian and a current Liberal minister, where she reportedly called him a horrible person.
I'm focused on keeping Australia's economy strong.
Mr Morrison has also been pressed on why he couldn't say how much a loaf of bread or milk cost. Today, he was armed with figures and jokes to deflect from his lack of answers. Mr Morrison's also admitted mistakes have been made in the pandemic response.
The local stock market has had its biggest day of the year. The NZX Top 50 closed up 231 points, or 1.9%, at 12,290 today. Logistics company Mainfreight, one of the biggest stocks on the market, led the index higher after a trading update revealed its earnings for the 9 months ended December were up 45% on a year ago. However, the NZX is down nearly 6% for the year. And in sport, New Zealand Rugby has confirmed it will move all 6 New Zealand-based Super Rugby Pacific sides to Queenstown for the next month and possibly longer. It says the decision is to reduce the risk of COVID-19 sidelining any of the teams and to provide the best chance of the inaugural Super Rugby Pacific season kicking off as scheduled in just over 2 weeks. The teams will transfer to Queenstown this weekend. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Ian Hislop presents a history of child protection in Aotearoa. British author Freya North discusses her latest novel, Little Wing, inspired by the Hebridean island of Harris. And we are giving away music for the first Hump Prize of 2022, specifically the music of the band Sax Cess. Well, they would be, wouldn't they? With me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. First, a reminder there's a red warning for heavy rain in force for the South Island's west coast. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, often cloudy with a few light showers or drizzle patches. Waikato to Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, but a chance of a light shower from Waikato to Taranaki. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, partly cloudy, occasional rain tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, periods of rain about Nelson and inland Marlborough and brief falls elsewhere. Heavy falls are possible about the ranges. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also for the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago lakes and rivers. Rain with very heavy falls and thunderstorms. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also for Southland, rain or showers at times with possible thunderstorms. Rain clearing for coastal Southland late tomorrow morning. And for Te Kuhu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, possible fog tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Unemployment insurance payouts to people who lose their jobs are far from a welfare win, according to beneficiary advocates who say they will drive more inequality across Aotearoa. Workers would be paid up to 80% of their wage for 7 months under the employment insurance scheme unveiled by the government today. It covers people who are made redundant, laid off or have a health condition or disability that affects their ability to work. The scheme will be managed by ACC and is being lauded by unions and many businesses, but not everyone is convinced. Joining me now is Susan St John, who was a member of the government's Welfare Expert Advisory Group and is an economics professor at Auckland University. Kia ora, Susan.
Kia ora. Can I just correct you? I wasn't a member of that group.
Okay, so let's start with the scheme. Is it a good idea or not?
I don't think we should underestimate the scale of it and just how complex it's going to be. And you do have to ask the question, just exactly what problem is it trying to address? Those of us that are working in the welfare sector would argue that the biggest problem is what's happening with people with precarious work and part-time work in and out of unstable employment situations, and the growth of poverty and inequality. This scheme looks like it's designed to meet the needs of the higher income earners who've got stable jobs. In fact, it seems like it's designed for 20th century conditions rather than 21st century conditions. So that's a big worry, but I don't think we should underestimate just how complicated it's all going to be. In scale, it is rivaling the size of ACC.
So if we can start with who benefits, right? You've said there, obviously, there are people who have workers that is not sure that they're working multiple jobs. The government's saying that this will cover those people. If they lose one of those jobs, they will top them up. It covers contract workers and people who have multiple jobs. So isn't it kind of wrapping around, well, pretty much everyone who is in employment?
Well, we have to see the detail of exactly how that's going to work. We do know that you've got to have 6 months of contributions in the last 18 months to qualify for a payment. Now, does that mean contributions full-time, or, how's that going to be worked out? And when you think about the patterns of work that are emerging and the growth of self-employment, for example, it's just hard to see how it's going to meet the needs of people who don't fit that standard, secure, regular work at a reasonably high income. Because remember that this promised scheme is only going to offer 80% income replacement anyway. So at the lower end, if you're not earning terribly much, that's not very much. You might be better off on a welfare benefit.
Do you see inconsistencies in the way this policy would be managed and the way benefits are administered? For example, it's not means tested or asset tested, and partners' earnings are not taken into consideration, where with a benefit, partners' income is.
Well, what's going to be the real tragedy of this is if we don't get the welfare reform that we ought to have to remedy some of the things that you're talking about. So the individualisation of benefits is really important. But I see those sorts of issues being put on the back burner because this is going to be a very complex scheme to get off the ground and get working properly. It is of great concern that there are serious deficiencies within the welfare sector that the government is not addressing or is addressing very, very slowly. And there's things like working for families. We've been promised a review of that. Well, is that going to fall by the wayside while they try to get this scheme off the ground?
Well, I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Are these two things mutually exclusive? Can we not have an income insurance scheme and your desired, better, improved welfare system?
Well, in theory we can. It's just very hard to see how they're going to get this implemented by the end of 2023 and achieve welfare reform at the same time and a massive reform of working for families. And there are so many issues that will be raised. For example, if you're on a social insurance payment, are your children going to qualify for the in-work tax credit? Who's been thinking about these little anomalies around the edges? I imagine that you probably would, because you'll be part of the good people who are made unemployed for not their own fault, and therefore you're likely to get privileged treatment. Whereas what's going to happen to all the disabled, all the unemployed, currently when the scheme is introduced, it certainly won't cover them at all.
So, Susan, do you think if the government goes ahead with this scheme, there is a submissions period. So if it goes ahead with this scheme, do you have no confidence that they will forge ahead with welfare reform?
Well, I would say that we're going to have a very long period of consultation to get a social insurance scheme off the ground. They'd only given us till April to reply to the discussion document, and then they've got to introduce legislation and get it up and running by 2023. They've only got so much capacity, and they've made very slow progress on welfare reform to date.
Is ACC the right organisation to administer this if it were to go ahead?
Well, I'm glad you've asked that, because I just don't see it fitting with ACC. ACC is a no-fault scheme. This scheme is designed for those who lose work, and it's not their fault. So if it is their fault, and who's going to be the decider of that, then if it's their fault, they won't get cover. So it's different in principle to ACC. ACC are the experts in handling rehabilitation and treatment of injuries. They're not the experts in handling reintegrating people within the workforce in changed employment situations. I don't see anything from ACC that gives me any confidence that they are the right people. The other thing is that ACC fight tooth and nail for any extension of coverage. Now we're getting this massive extension. People who are sick are going to get equivalent compensation. It's an enormous change to suddenly push into ACC.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Susan St John, who's an economics professor at Auckland University. An Otago scheme aimed to keep floodwaters at bay is under review as it prepares to face more pressure from climate change. The Lower Taieri Flood Protection Scheme is a buffer for roughly 13,000 hectares, including the townships of Mosgiel, Outram, Momona and the Dunedin Airport. Some of the scheme dates back to 1870, but ageing infrastructure is only part of the problem. Tess Brunton has more.
When the Taieri River flooded last January, it hit Outram Berry Farm during peak season. Its owner, Alex Cunningham, says most of their berries were submerged and some of the young plants went completely underwater.
It also submerged farm implements and vehicles at the time, or it got up into their engine bays. And then the residue of the flood, which of course stopped us picking for a couple of weeks while we waited for the bushes to dry out, then left a silt residue behind on the berries, which was tasteable.
The Otago Regional Council has earmarked about $45 million to protect the Taieri Plain from flooding over the next 3 decades. Its engineering manager, Michelle Mifflin, says the Lower Taieri Flood Protection Scheme is currently fit for purpose.
It's nothing to be concerned or alarmed about. It's future thinking. It's not only for the integrity of the scheme now, but we are looking to the future of the scheme in a 10, 20, 30-year plan.
She says flood banks are only part of the picture, as raising or widening them can make them more vulnerable.
But it might mean that we look at spillways, we might look at retreat in some areas where the scheme reaches the sea. So there's a lot of options, and the review will help guide those decisions around that.
She says vulnerable home and property owners still need a flood plan.
You have to have flood mitigation. The scheme provides a level of protection and service, but there has to be that awareness that you mentioned and that responsibility for any owner in a rural or urban environment that they need to be prepared.
Dunedin Airport Chief Executive Richard Roberts is glad the review is underway as flooding events become more frequent.
The inundation that we've had have been around the peripheries of the airport, and it could be car park. Some of the tenants, rental car garages have been flooded and not been able to be occupied for a number of days.
He's keen to see a spotlight on the scheme's management to ensure it's also in tip-top shape for the future.
We've got these massive pump stations that drains the whole valley. Are they turned on early enough in a weather event? Are they robust enough if we lose power supplies, the backup? All those operational things, we need to address those.
Tangata Whenua and local farmer Ian Bryant says his te puna were based in a kaik near Henley on the riverbank of the Taieri River.
So the flood never affected us down at Henley because of the Taieri Plain acted as a big basin to contain the floodwater.
He hopes iwi will have an active seat at the table during the review.
As soon as the water was channeled by flood banks and drainage systems were put in, our Henley kaika became into that unprotected area, and so it immediately became unviable and it just disappeared within a short number of years once the flood protection scheme went in.
Mosgiel Taieri Community Board Chair Joy Davis is pleased with the community consultation.
And the way they're listening to the locals and finding out from people who live on the floodplain where the pinch points are, why things haven't worked in the past, what might work in the future. So I think there's a lot more two-way conversation. And that gives some sense of security to people as well, to know that their local knowledge is being listened to.
The council is gathering together recommendations before analysing them and taking them to the community and the council chambers later this year.
It's 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The case of Charlotte Bellis has enraged some Afghan women who believe it trivialises the Taliban. The pregnant Kiwi journalist made global headlines when she said the Taliban had offered her safe harbour while she struggled to get back to New Zealand. Afghan women say the story has overshadowed the reality they live every day. The ABC's Avani Dias has more.
New Zealand journalist Charlotte Bellis called it a brutal irony that she was offered a safe haven by the Taliban as an unmarried pregnant woman, while the New Zealand government would not allow her to return home. But as her column went viral around the world this week, Afghan women were protesting the disappearance of female activists in what they say is the latest example of the deterioration of women's rights. For Afghan women like 30-year-old Sadoba Nuzai, this shows a clear difference in how Afghan and foreign women are treated by the militant Taliban.
Taliban trying to convey the message that they are know about human rights, especially women rights. But in reality, their treatment is not good enough with Afghan women, as they are supporting and respect for that New Zealand lady.
On Tuesday, the New Zealand government said Charlotte Bellis could leave Afghanistan and offered her a place in hotel quarantine.
There is a place in MIQ for the type of situation that Charlotte Bellis is facing, and in fact there is a secured place for her.
In September, a pregnant former Afghan policewoman was seen being shot dead by Taliban fighters. The group denies it was involved. Afghan man and Pittsburgh University researcher Dr. Omar Sadr has been researching the Taliban takeover.
So this is really a double standard, why they treat a white Western woman and a way to show the world, the international community, that they are behaving like a responsible government, or let's say like a civilized government. But with respect to the people of Afghanistan and the women in Afghanistan, they behave totally different.
It's been almost 6 months since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and women say they now live in fear and can't study or work. Last week, Europe and the US offered the Taliban humanitarian aid in exchange for an improvement of Afghan human rights, as large parts of the country face extreme levels of hunger. Sodabar Nuzai is urging the international community to resist offering the Taliban support until all women in Afghanistan, not just foreigners, are given basic rights.
Do not recognize them officially until they really change their mindsets about women, until they really give the human right for Afghans.
The Beijing Winter Olympics are being hosted inside a veritable fortress. Designed to prevent the spread of COVID, the bubble is the most ambitious quarantine attempted anywhere since the start of the pandemic. CNN's Selena Wang went to check it out.
My team and I are traveling to Beijing for the Winter Olympic Games, held under some of the strictest COVID countermeasures in the world. Our journey starts weeks before.
I'm here in Tokyo. It's 14 days before the Games, but I've already got to download this Olympic Health app, start tracking my health in here every day, and upload my vaccine certificate. I'm getting some deja vu using this app since we had to use a similar one for the Tokyo Games.
But this time I'm using a burner phone because of cybersecurity concerns in China.
For the next 2 weeks, I'm limiting physical interactions with others as much as possible. 96 hours before departure, here I go in for my first test.
Back home, I upload my information to get this green QR code.
Here we go, we're taking off. Just landed in Beijing. It's totally surreal. I haven't been back here since I moved about 1.5 years ago. First thing I saw walking off the airplane is a sea of hazmat suits. Feels a bit more like going into a medical facility than the Olympic buzz you'd expect getting off the airplane. That was extremely painful. I just had a nose and a throat PCR test. I was tearing up a bit.
I clear customs, immigration, and get my Olympic badge without seeing a single face.
There you are.
I'm officially in what organizers are calling the closed loop. Multiple bubbles connected by dedicated transport. The goal? To keep Olympic participants separate from the rest of China.
Finally on my way to the hotel on this special bus that's just for transporting Olympic participants. Arrived at the hotel, they've got this giant wall all around the hotel so you can't just walk in and out easily.
The local staff here are also part of this bubble. They'll have to quarantine for 21 days before leaving the bubble and returning to their homes in China. Beijing isn't taking any chances. Entire communities in China have gone into lockdown over even just one COVID case. I've been waiting 6 hours, just got the call. My results came back negative. I am so relieved, but it's not over yet. I'll be tested daily and will be mostly confined to this room and Olympic venues during my entire stay here.
The NFL's greatest player, Tom Brady, is walking away from the sport.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a second Super Bowl title. And Tom Brady, you're looking at the greatest right there.
It's been an amazing year. Just really proud of all the guys, the effort we put in. We knew we were playing a great football team tonight. You want to get this far, you got to get the job done, and we did it.
That was Brady after winning his 7th Super Bowl title last year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. After 22 seasons in the NFL, the quarterback has won more championships than any other player, etching his name into the sport's history books. In a statement on social media, the 44-year-old says it's time he focused his energy elsewhere. He says the physical, mental and emotional challenge every single day has allowed him to maximise his highest potential, and says there are no shortcuts to success on the field or in life. Joey Knight, a sports reporter for the Tampa Bay Times, says there's no question Brady's the best ever.
Statistics and longevity bear that out. When you talk about somebody, first of all, who not only spent 22 seasons in the NFL, but performed at a high level, at the highest of levels, for 22 seasons, more than 2 decades, nobody has to speak for that. Time speaks for it. But I'm sitting right here listing a number of his accomplishments and records, and the list is endless. Most regular season victories, 243. Most playoff victories, 35. Most Super Bowl titles, 7. And the list goes on and on and on. This is the greatest NFL career of all time. There are few athletes on the planet who take care of their body more meticulously than Tom Brady. What they put into their body, what time they go to bed, how they stretch, how they exercise, how they warm up. Another reason for that longevity is he has benefited from some rules changes in the NFL through the years that protects the quarterback. Quarterbacks don't take near the beating these days as they did in the 70s and 80s. They could get battered. They could get just their worlds rocked. In a sense, Tom Brady competed at the right time. He came along at the right time.
Tom Brady says the future is exciting and says exactly what his days will look like is a work in progress. A southern koala has been born in Europe for the first time ever. Their animals, usually found in South Australia, are larger, darker and fluffier than those from the north. The koala was born at Longleat Safari Park in England, which first established its colony 3 years ago with 5 koalas from a park near Adelaide. Here's the BBC's Jonah Fisher with more.
This baby koala was actually born about 6 months ago, but nobody noticed as it was the size of a jelly bean and immediately crawled into its mother Violet's pouch. It's now much bigger, though it's still not known if it's male or female. Like many youngsters, it has some pretty disgusting habits. One of its main foods is currently Violet's eucalyptus-rich poo. Eating it is an important step towards eventually consuming the leaves of the plant itself. Setting up and maintaining the koalas has been a massive undertaking for Longleat, which grows some of the eucalyptus they need on site. After the devastating fires of 2 years ago, koala numbers in Australia have fallen dramatically. Given that they spend most of their time sitting in trees, sleeping and eating, they are particularly at risk from climate change and more forest fires.
Who knew that? Koala babies eat their mum's poo. OK, some of your feedback before we head off on the insurance scheme for workers who are made redundant, laid off or suffer illness, which means they can't work. Well, most of the feedback is positive about this. This person says this new redundancy payment is great and fills the unfairness gap of ACC. My sister did her last day of work today because of her health. How great it would be if she could have gotten payments like this and know it was available. It would take the financial worry out of an awful situation that she finds herself in. Joe says, Luxon, 31st January, we need to be compassionate. 2nd February, no unemployment benefit. To be fair, Joe, it's an insurance policy, so slightly different to the unemployment benefit. Someone else says 1.39% of your wages in return for 80% when you need it. Sounds like a bargain. That's all we've got time for tonight. If you missed anything from the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5. First up is looking for a date to look forward to for Kiwis stranded overseas when the Prime Minister outlines her timeline for the border reopening.
RNZ News headlines. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The head of the Immunisation Advisory Centre doubts COVID-19 booster shots will be needed on a regular basis. Dr Nikki Turner has told Checkpoint she doesn't believe people who are healthy will continue to need ongoing shots. The High Court has knocked back a bid by a small group of parents to stop the COVID vaccine rollout for children. A state of emergency has been declared in the Bulla district, which is being drenched by heavy rain, and a rest home in Westport has been evacuated as a precaution, and the Mayor says more evacuations are likely. Those